Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel.
If you would ask Sami Sabra or Shira Sabra, an Israeli on the street, what's their first association with Mount Hermon, the highest peak in Israel, crowns the border of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon, they would probably refer to two very different pictures. They may relate to the place of the Hermon in the 1967 Six Days War or the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Security, battle, heroism, the memory of the fallen. They may also hum a few bars from one of the many popular Israeli songs that mention the Hermon, maybe Malchut HaHermon, the Hermon Kingdom. Written during the 6 Days War, the song's a fictional letter from a soldier to his girlfriend, promising a bright future and a new home on the glowing mountaintop. The song became particularly popular during the Yom Kippur War, with Israel taking the lower peak of the Hermon from the Syrians, and the heavy price that was paid in the loss of life and injuries sustained by Israeli forces fighting their way up the mountain to ensure that Israel would control this strategic height. It would also not be surprising if people would mention the ski site on Mount Hermon, adjacent to Neve Ativ. 25 kilometers of trails at an elevation between 1,600 to 2,000 meters, covered with snow only part of the winter, although before the onset of global warming, not uncommon to see snow on the Hermon peak earlier and later than we do these days. The popularity of the Hermon for Israelis might also be due to Israel's strong sense of local patriotism. Something like, the Swiss and the Italians, they can brag about their Alps. The ski resort on Mount Hermon is our own mini Alps, right here in our own backyard. But could it be that even skiing and snowboarding is not just amusement? When the first snow hits, Israelis load onto their cars, heavy coats, all the gear. Let's face it, these coats, this gear, 90% of the year, in 90% of Israel, has absolutely no purpose. People set out to make the long trek from around the country to the Hermon. They're happy to sit in traffic. The roads are clogged. Stop and stall, crawling up the mountain to the ski site. And with ascending the mountain, the celebrations begin. People ski and snowboard, and kids build snow figures. They race snowboards, and parents are teaching their kids how to ski. The ski trip, if we take a step back, through, let's call it an anthropological lens, it's a kind of a pilgrimage. And like other pilgrimages that we know from Jewish tradition and from other faiths and peoples, there's a special place where it happens. There's a special time when it takes place. There's a special costume. There's unique activities connected with this pilgrimage. It may sound off the wall at first. That's kind of my go-to. But consider the Hermon ski pilgrimage may be only the most recent in a long history of pilgrimages, holy sites, and rituals that mark Mount Hermon not only as a geographical wonder and a strategic asset, but mark it as sacred ground.
Yes, we go from skiing to sacred, and they come together. Throughout the world and in countless human cultures, there are mountains that are seen as sacred ground. Olympus of Greece, Mount Fuji of Japan, Mount Kilimanjaro of Tanzania. It may be simply about prodigious height in the sense that from mountain peaks, the gap between the earthly and the heavenly seems smaller. The home of the divine is reachable. From a Jewish perspective, when we think about the holy mountain, Zion, Moriah, Ariel comes to mind. From the time of the kings of Judah, and according to tradition from the story of the binding of Isaac, Genesis 22, the people of Israel saw Zion, the site of the first temple from the time of Solomon, approximately 950 BCE, and the second temple from the time of the return of the exiles, with the proclamation of the Persian King Cyrus. As Isaiah proclaimed, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the words of the law from Jerusalem.
The connection with Mount Zion and Jerusalem, all of us who visited the Western Wall or had the chance to go up to the Temple Mount or do a view from the Jewish Quarter or from the other side from the Mount of Olives, it's really clear the connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem, Mount Zion, the site of the temple. But the Bible remembers another holy mountain, Mount Hermon. And so in the book of Psalms, Psalm 29, the voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes the mountains to skip like a calf. Lebanon and Sirion like a young wild ox. I mean, this is a God that's described as a thrasher, an elemental power who rips up forests and just tosses mountains up in the air. Sirion, from that verse in Psalms, it's another name for the Hermon, and Deuteronomy 3 recounts the battle between Israel and the Amorites on the northern border between Israel and the Amorite lands. The text reminds us that, quote, Hermon is called Sirion by the Sidonians. The Amorites call it Sneer. The Sidonians, they're the people of the city of Sidon, today in Lebanon, the Phoenician sea warriors. Hermon is mentioned 15 times in the Bible, and its very name is used in both Hebrew and actually in Arabic. There's a root in Hebrew, chet resh mem, to refer to an area consecrated and set apart as an earthly focus for interaction for the divine. If we come back to Jerusalem for a moment, important to remember, the area that we refer to as the Temple Mount is known in Arabic as Haram el Sharif, the noble sanctuary. That same root, chet resh mem, Haram, Hermon.
That's right. And the Bible, like all literature, draws its inspiration from sources that are both seen and unseen. And if we look at the worlds of the ancient Middle East, before the stories of Abram and Sarah and the descendants were told, there were other stories and other heroes. The mountain remains. Let's look at the Gilgamesh at the Hermon. A mighty warrior and a beast man wrestle in a mountainous wilderness. Their grappling brings down forests, triggers earthquakes, raises up mountains, and brings valleys low. Nearly 4,000 years ago, the ancient people of Mesopotamia and the kingdoms of Akkadian and of Babylonia shared the story of Gilgamesh and of his stalwart compatriot Enkidu. Gilgamesh was a Hercules of the ancient Near East, a demigod, strongman, warrior, and later himself a king. His adventures profoundly influenced the foundational works that became the basis for what today we call Western civilization, including the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Hebrew Bible. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions Mount Hermon. Gilgamesh and Enkidu battle a monstrous titan named Humbaba, and in that thunderous struggle, dating roughly to 2000 BCE, the ground split open with the heels of their feet. As they whirled around in circles, Mount Hermon and Lebanon split, the white clouds darkened, death rained down on them like fog.
Sorel, very cool that you mentioned Gilgamesh. I mean, we're talking about what I think is just a fascinating piece of ancient literature, and it's such a great adventure story. But, you know, let's face it, for most people, Gilgamesh is not really part of our cultural memory. Gilgamesh doesn't have the oomph, the impact, the resonance that the Bible has. In the context of the Bible, specifically the Greek Bible, what Christians call the New Testament, the Hermon is hinted at as one of the places where Jesus and his students walked. The place where Christians believe that Jesus revealed his divine nature to his students, and where he met with Elijah and with Moses, what's remembered in Christian tradition as the Transfiguration. And so in Matthew 17, it says, and after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. In the Gospel of Matthew, the name of the high mountain is not given. And there is a tradition dating back to at least the 4th century CE that identifies the high mountain. Wait for it, Mount Tabor, Lower Galilee. It's like 12 kilometers from Nazareth. It's about 7.5 miles from the city of Nazareth. There's a 20th century Franciscan church on the top of Mount Tabor, and there were earlier sanctuaries there on that site that date back to the Crusaders and even to the Byzantine period. Now, could the high mountain mentioned in Matthew 17 be Mount Hermon? Well, we do know that the book of Matthew portrays Jesus and his students having been in the city of Caesarea Philippi before their mountain ascent. Caesarea Philippi is not next to Tabor. Caesarea Philippi is Panias, or in Arabic, Banyas. It was a Hellenistic Roman city on the water sources of the Jordan River as the water flows down the mountain, down from the Hermon. Those of you who have visited the Banyas, remember the rolling water, how you can hear it all around you, particularly if there's been a good season of winter rain and melting snow and the lush vegetation all around. Now, Mount Tabor is 100 kilometers, like 60 miles from Caesarea Philippi, from the Banyas. Hermon is the closest high mountain to Caesarea Philippi, to the Banyas. When Matthew mentions the high mountain, well, Mount Tabor is I don't want to be disrespectful, a large hill, 575 meters. Mount Hermon is really a high mountain, as it says in the text, 2,814 meters. So it could well be that one of the key moments in Christian tradition telling of the story of Jesus and his disciples and what Christians call the Transfiguration took place on the towering summit of Mount Hermon.
We're talking about Jesus, Gilgamesh, all these stories. What is amazing is that the archaeology in Mount Hermon actually reveals itself. The long line of cults, faiths, and religion that mark the mountain as a special arena for human communication with the divine, as we've described. We have Hermon's Casa Anta, the highest temple of the ancient world, sits at 2,800 meters above sea level. It was documented by Sir Charles Warren in 1869, and he described the temple as a rectangular building sitting on an oval stone plateau without a roof. He had removed a limestone stele from the northwest of the oval, split it into two pieces, and carried it down the mountain and back to the British Museum, where it actually currently resides. A Greek inscription was translated by George Nicholsberg to read, "According to the commands of the greatest and holy God, those who take an oath proceed from here." Although the Casa Anta site is clearly a Hellenistic pagan shrine, we can't help but be reminded of the Jewish tradition, linking the oath made by the God of Israel to Abram at Mount Bitarim, Har Dov, on the Hermon Ridge. On the Hermon, the history of the Jewish people is revealed to Abram, the future slavery in Egypt, the Exodus, and the inheritance of the lands of Israel by a refugee nation striking out, as we read in Genesis, for the path of freedom. And beyond the examples mentioned above, more than 30 shrines and temples have been found in this geographical area, giving it its historical relevance. It's grounded in archaeology, and beside the Christian and Islamic communities, it's also considered a sacred place for the Druze, whose villages spread along the northern Golan Heights and into Syria and Lebanon.
I mean, bringing in the Druze is so important to this story. If we think about the area surrounding the Hermon in Israel and Syria and in Lebanon, for centuries, the towns and villages of the Druze, very proud, tough, devoted ethnic religious group, they may be little known in America and maybe throughout the West, but here in Israel and throughout the Middle East, they're quite well known. For centuries, the Druze have practiced their faith. They've upheld their communal life in the shadow of Mount Hermon. An Arabic-speaking ethnic and religious minority group, the Druze live in mountainous parts of Syria, Lebanon, northern Israel, and northern Jordan. They're Arabic speakers, yet they're not Muslims. Having broken from the Shiite Islam in the 11th century, they're committed to their own distinct religion.
Right, and as a monotheistic faith, they refer to themselves as the Muwahideen, the believers in unity. And yeah, they promote the belief that God is one, there's only one God. They embrace and honor many of the prophets revered by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Jethro, the father of Zipporah and Moses' father-in-law, is particularly honored among the Druze. And the yearly holy days, April 15th, 8th to 18th, at his traditional tomb at Nebi Shweb, is a day of communal gathering, prayer, and reflection. The tomb site is adjacent to the Horns of Chittim, just west of Tiberias, the site where the armies of Salah ad-Din defeated the Christian Crusaders on July the 4th, 1187. So the Druze faith, it based itself on what's called the 7 precepts. And each of these these 7 principles, is really fascinating. It's a spiritual and ethical cornerstone securing Druze belief and action. So, among these precepts are commitment to honesty and truthfulness, protection of outsiders and strangers, emulating the protection granted by Jethro on Moses, his son-in-law, and the belief that every hour of every day is a time to reckon oneself before God. So there's many of these precepts that we can all connect to. And they guard their religious faith and their culture with great fervor. Within the Druze community, the distinction between those who have not been initiated and have not committed themselves to learning and acting in the Druze faith, others who do take on the yoke of faith and observance are the central core, that they voluntarily take upon themselves the mission related to keeping that knowledge going, the observance, the passing down of the faith to the next generation. So we'd say, I think it's roughly supposed to be about 20% who are devotees of the Druze faith, so they're the hardcore, if you will. So those 20% who are devotees of the Druze faith are known as al-Ukal, the knowledgeable.
A lot of times when we meet with Druze in Israel or on the Golan Heights with groups, I think one of the things that always grabs people is the Druze belief in the migration of souls or reincarnation. All the Druze living today, they understand themselves as reincarnated souls of the original members of the Druze community going back to the 11th century. No outsider can join the Druze.
Nobody can convert.
That's right. There's no such thing.
That's not a thing.
And so it's very different from Judaism or Christianity or Islam.
So let me ask you a question. So those who are not practicing necessarily or more observant, that belief in reincarnation, that's common among all Druze?
Common among all Druze. Although, like in many situations, you'd have to ask each person to actually, get their sense. But it's a very, very widespread, accepted belief in the Druze community up until and including today. Dr. Macha Nantur, who was of the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University, in research done on this issue, she really talks about the idea of reincarnation or transmigration of souls. It's a powerful cement that really galvanizes Druze communal identity all throughout the ages. It's a belief that has, one could say, a social function. It's held that people are able to share with others memories from their former lives, and that this is particularly strong among young children. The memories and stories, oftentimes from lives broken by tragedy, death by illness, or accident, or in war, are enshrined through the belief in reincarnation and become a living testament, building community identity and memory from generation to generation to generation. Rafik Halabi, an Israeli Druze, he's a prominent journalist, a broadcaster, author, filmmaker, dedicated his 2008 film, Fog, to sharing the phenomenon of reincarnation as a living element in Druze religious and communal life.
So if we look at numbers today, the Druze citizens of Israel are estimated to approximately 150,000 people. That makes up about 1.6% of Israel's population. And, in the Israeli army, you can really see the Druze are very well represented. They have a proud tradition and identification with the state of Israel. They've served with distinction in both the military and civil service, with many Druze generals, ambassadors, members of Knesset, and government ministers. And yet they face unresolved questions, like so many groups in Israeli society, about their place, how they fit into the political and social order, which is a reflection of, broader Israeli dilemmas that face many, many groups within Israel. After the Six-Day War, the Druze of the Golan Heights, mainly clustered in 4 towns and villages below Mount Hermon, came under Israeli rule. Historically, Golan Druze, that makes up nearly 30,000 people, had largely retained allegiance to and citizenship in Syria, including during the terrible Syrian civil war. And in 2024, with the fall of the Assad regime, a new chapter, both of opportunity and challenges, has opened for the Golan Druze and for Israel. So we've talked about the many different stories that one mountain has absorbed over the years, from a historical, biblical, security, military lens. And you might have imagined prior that a trip to Mount Hermon today would include bird watching, a bit of geology, maybe a playful roll in the snow. But beneath the pristine white drifts and rugged hills lie stories of gods and heroes, ancient shrines, and a rich human mosaic that weaves Israel's history with the present. It isn't just a place to visit. The Hermon is a place to reflect. And ask yourself, what are your sacred sites? What legacies are you passing down? And what are the high places, either literal or metaphorical, that move you, inspire you, and connect you to something greater, bigger than yourself? Let Mount Hermon's sacred, snowy secrets remind us that every peak holds more than what meets the eye.
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hello, my name is Nimrod Slutsky, and I'm a J-Square educator. And for years, I've been living in the north of Israel, underneath Mount Hermon. Whenever my eyes are gazing up towards the Hermon, they always land upon Nimrod's fortress, which has been captivating my imaginations for years. Nimrod's fortress is sitting, by the way, between Damascus and the Middle East coast. As such, armies have been going across it and next to it for the period that it existed. And I, standing at Nimrod's fortress, can almost hear them as they're going across. Looking at Nimrod's fortress, you need to, first of all, change the name that you call it. Because it's not named after me and not after biblical Nimrod, who I'm named after, but it's actually been called Kalat al-Subeba in Arabic when it was built, which probably means the fortress upon the cliff top. Very typical, understood name for the place. Looking at the history of the place, the historical beginnings of Kalat Nimrud have to do with the year 1187, when Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, the great Muslim warrior, has defeated the Crusaders at Karnei Chitin, right above Tiberias. When that has happened, he has gained control of a huge vast of empire across the Middle East, ranging from modern days Iraq to modern days Egypt. The Crusaders have tried to return several times, and Salah ad-Din and his descendants were afraid of them coming back. 40 years after his victory, one of his nephews, Abd al-Malik el-Ayyub, who was the ruler of Damascus, was afraid that the Fifth Crusade is going to arrive and defeat him. When the fortress was built, it's situated on a hill overlooking the main road to Damascus. Its purpose was to defend the place, and as such, it has many towers looking towards the road and almost none which are looking towards the deep cliffs which are surrounding the fortress. The fortress is very much at the situation where it was built. Very striking and impressive, huge stones which were used in order to build it, and several secret hideaway passages which, visiting the place, you can go and explore. Abd al-Malik and his warriors were waiting for the Crusaders to come, and they never did. And as such, the fortress lay and waited. In the year 1260, the Mongols have came to the Middle East, and they've conquered Damascus. And when doing such, they became the rulers and the controllers of Qalat Namrud, Qalat al-Subeba. The Mongols' army continued on their journey towards Egypt, and as such, not far away, a huge battle took place between the Mongols and the Mamluks, who were the slave warriors of the Ayyubian dynasty. Their armies came from Egypt, and these two huge armies met up in En Jalud, which is outside of modern-day Zafula. On that battle, for the first time, the Mongols have lost. And when that happened, the fortress became the domain of Baybars, a new sultan. This is the first time that the Mongol forces have been defeated. The Mamluks warriors have gained control of the fortress, and their commander, Baybars, has given it to his friend and subject, Bilik, who was the next ruler of the fortress. Nimrod's fortress actually never stood in battle against any enemies. And after the Mamluk dynasty has ended, the place has diminished and its importance dissipated. About 200 years ago, it actually gained the name Nimrod's fortress. Only during the time of the Turks, we are hearing of such name being given to the place. The fortress has laid quiet for an extended period of time, during which, on the year 1867, Mark Twain came and visited the place in his book, Innocents Abroad, which describes his travels to the old world from his perspective and the Middle East and the Holy Land, while being extremely funny where he's going and very cynical, he's actually saying about Nimrod's fortress that it's one of the glorious set of ruins that he's ever seen. At the year 2006, Nimrod's fortress became the set for a movie by Yossi Sider called Before. When standing in Nimrod's fortress, we can actually see the Crusade citadel of Before inside Lebanon. Before was an IDF outpost, which was evacuated in the year 2000. And the movie describes the reality of life for IDF soldiers as they are deployed in southern Lebanon. The movie was nominated for an Oscar and never got that. But it gives us a window into what life in an outpost or maybe a fortress looks like. For the last year, coming and visiting Nimrod's fortress was impossible. Now it has been reopened to the public, and I hope to see you during your travels visiting the place and gaining from the echoes of time which rebits through it.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.